play Kilroy for a few minutes. Because this is how we're going to get to see me. What we have here is a phonograph. I don't know, for probably the 1970s. It belongs to a friend of mine. It's had this probably sitting around for a while. I'm going to show you how to get one of these apart, because there's a couple of little nuances that occur when actually trying to get into this. You know how they used to say, no user serviceable parts inside? Refer servicing to qualified service technician. Yeah, I got that memorized because it didn't mean squat back then neither. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna wade through this and see what you see what I did there? Yeah, we're gonna wade through this and check some things out. There's a power cord here somewhere. Oh yeah. Juice. All right, so fire in a hole. Oh, look at that. It's already started spinning. Okay, so it wasn't off. It's a GE, General Electric, GE Stereo 400. They had a couple of different models of these. There was the 400 and then there was the 500. The 500 was affectionately referred to as a Trimline, but this just says Stereo 400. I don't like quite calling it a turntable. I mean, yeah, okay, in this case it's a turntable, but when I think of an actual unit, a turntable is usually just a transcription turntable where it doesn't have any real mechanisms inside there. It's just a platter attached to a motor. I like direct drive myself. And then a tone arm mounted on the plinth that is, you know, makes it a turntable. There's a little locking mechanism right here and right here. Why for, you know? Okay, well, because you push that button in and then the speakers come round. So it actually behaves sort of like stereo record player, okay? I got so much stuff on my workbench here just to be able to do videos that I can't really open this thing up. This thing is probably close to 3 feet wide when you're all done with it. So, and it has a handle. That means it's portable. Okay, so I'm getting sound out of both speakers. Cartridge is good. I felt the needle on there. Okay, so the record hold down is all the way down, and the knob right here, basically a dual function. This outer ring will change the speed of the record player turntable. I did notice that back here, the 45 RPM adapter is missing. Okay. It's trying real hard. All right. He says that's what it was doing. He says it didn't quite want to reject. Okay. So, and because the record hold down is all the way down, meaning no records on there, it should just shut itself off. Except it just stopped. Let me just give it some help here. Oh boy. Yeah, that mechanism. Okay, but it didn't shut off. But there's an off indication right over here. I can move this mechanism knob to the off position. Oh, okay. All right. Maybe now it'll shut off after, you know, straining. Boy, this is going to eat up a lot of video time trying to wait for this thing to behave. Clearly, there's some mechanism stuff going on here. What we want to do is try to bring this up to speed. No pun intended. Alrighty, so studio wasn't quite set up for something this large, she said. Here's what we got to do. These screws are usually, when this is manufactured and it's being shipped out, these are usually screwed down. And what those screws will do is they actually pull this chassis down so that it doesn't have a tendency to shift in shipping. It's also spring-loaded. You know, the idea being that, you know, you're playing records, you had a bunch of your friends over, and, you know, you're having a little sock hop or something like that, you know, because your parents are out of town. Well, you bump into this thing, and supposedly the spring loading is supposed to absorb the being bumped. It's clever, but it never really worked. On the inside of this chassis, underneath here, is a little gizmo called a transit clip, and we have to be able to get to that. This little thing right there, it's like a little plastic plug. Now, there isn't one on the other side. So what we have to do is we have to sort of pry that off. Rule number 15, if force doesn't work, you're not using enough. And there it comes. You got to get that off so that you can get your fingers inside here. All right. This transit clip is going to want to flip up this way. If you notice that platter came down, what's going to happen is that transit clip is going to come up through a hole in this plinth. There we go. Trust me, it was supposed to sound like that. Okay, so the screw head is up here, right there. When you turn this with a screwdriver, screw is going to come out. It acts like a nut, but when this transit clip is actually inside the hole in the plinth, then what happens is that this is flipped that way. This is going to be wider than the hole is large in diameter. And when you unscrew this, it's going to pull the platform down so that as the unit is being transported, the platform is not just bouncing around on there. You have to get one transit clip removed. Also, this tone arm, it wants to snap into place here, but I keep bumping it loose. I want to remove the stylus from the cartridge because as this tone arm moving all over the place and everything like that, I could do one of two things. Most of these, you know, you just go ahead and you grab this little tab right here, because this is a flip needle. That's the LP stylus, and this is the 78 stylus. And there's a really tiny little clip that goes around the stylus. Why they did that, I don't know, because it's really not necessary. And when you'll see how tiny it is. Most oftentimes, they're not even there anymore because if somebody's replaced the stylus, they probably lost it. I mean, it's so small, it can get lost real easy. The cartridge itself is floating. Wow, yeah. And it's kind of a spring steel kind of a thing. Again, I can't imagine what the purpose of it is because the stylus will stay in by itself without the clip. Now here's where I was talking about this little flip needle. If you just grab the top of it and pinch that, hold the cartridge with this other thumb, this thumb right here, and then just twist this and pull it this direction. It wants to hang on, but if you just, remember, force doesn't work, you're not using enough. Okay, and there you go. We can get back to opening up this chassis. Flipping that up, I'm gonna actually push it through the hole, so that will help get all of this loose. Now, all I have to do, as far as the record player is concerned, there's only going to be 3 connectors. This is going to be the audio input to the amplifier coming off of the cartridge, little teeny wires. 2 for left channel, 2 for right channel, and maybe a ground. So it may only be 4 wires. Right here has the power on it for the motor and power for the amplifier. Just pull them off. And it only wants to go on one way. Don't have to worry about getting them mixed up or anything like that. The real issue with this is going to be that it's just covered in dust. All of the metal parts in here are lubricated. Lubrication's in there to attract dust, and boy does it ever. Chassis is removed. We can set this cabinet aside. I'm gonna go ahead and just fold this up, move this out of the way. Now, you might be asking yourself, you know, why do you even go to the effort, you know, as far as working on an old record player? Well, there are people out there that are going to argue that, well, you know, vinyl's coming back. Well, vinyl never left. For those of us aficionados who have, you know, enjoyed records and vinyl, I mean, I still call them records. I mean, you know, vinyl, I got to tell you, records before vinyl were acetate. So, you know, it's like, well, you know, those acetate aficionados, and it's like you get your face slapped for saying stuff like that, you know, because people don't know what you're talking about. But they think they do. Oh, this is cool. October 22nd, 1965. So I was only off by a decade. I want to get underneath this platter. Platter itself is going to be held on with what is commonly referred to in the industry as a Jesus clip. Now you're thinking, oh, okay, well that's blasphemy. No, it's a Jesus clip. It's a C clip. The issue is that if you don't hang on to it and you start prying it loose and it just comes loose all of a sudden and flies across the room, Jesus! because finding a replacement is going to be like pulling teeth. This goes in a Ziploc bag. Platter just comes out nasty. This is the idler, and this is the motor shaft. And it's kind of a funky looking motor shaft, but it was the way that they simplified things in order to mass produce devices, phonographs, record players, tape recorders, and stuff like that. Well, anyway, the motor shaft has actually got so many different diameters. The entire mechanism in this record, mode change, all right, it's all driven by the platter, okay? The motor drives the idler drives the platter, but the platter, with this gear here, reaches down in here when the platter is in position to drive the mechanism. So there's a lot of gearing involved. This gear, and then this gear has got a bunch of cams on it that move this mechanism, and it slides back and around, basically raises the tone arm, drops the record. I mean, it's fairly ingenious. Friction is how this works. Friction is also why it won't work. There's a whole lot that can be going wrong here, and I'll be honest, you can narrow all of that down to lubrication. This ball bearing can be removed. I want to remove it because I don't want it to fall out of there. Heck, it's probably got enough old grease on there to I don't have to really worry about it coming loose. Up, there it goes. And there it is. So it's going to have a washer on top and bottom, and the brass looking part right there with the ball bearings in there, that's the race. The top and the bottom washer, if you will, are identical. So you don't have to worry about which one was on top or anything like that. This idler technically should probably be replaced, but it's another one of these Jesus clips. But I got the clip loose. Also, there's going to be a little washer right on there, and that will allow this idler to come off. Why? Because I'm going to go ahead and start soaking that in rubber rejuvenator. Idler comes off. That didn't even feel like it was lubricated. I mean, it literally squeaked coming off of that shaft. There is also a washer underneath here. These are often referred to as shims, and shims have different thicknesses on purpose because the height of this idler is critical to making sure that it rubs on the right portion of the motor shaft for the different speeds based on where this knob is. Let's compare this shim that was underneath the idler to the shim that I took off on top of the idler. Let's take a look, okay? This was the shim that was on top. So that shim that was on top, just under the Jesus clip, is 0.020. That one goes on top. This one goes underneath. What is it? 0.019. Believe it or not, they can be different. I want to go ahead and put them in a safe place, but I want to know which one is which. I've written onto the Post-it what the values are, and I know I have the handwriting of a serial killer. The shims are on there. This may or may not work, but this idler, KFC, the idler, it's got some pliability to it, but not really satisfied of its softness. I'm going to soak this in some rejuvenator. God. So we're just going to take the idler, drop it in there, and seal it up so that my wife doesn't have to smell it. I'm thinking we need to get started underneath. Come on in. Producer shows up in order to make sure that I'm earning my daily wage.
Indeed. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see his...
Oh, yeah, that's what he said.
Call to action, the thing he never does.
Well, I can barely stand to watch myself, so I can appreciate what you must be going through. Working on this, it really wants to be in a horizontal position because wanting to, observe what's going on underneath and so forth, it doesn't like to operate in an upright motion because there are parts of the mechanism in there that gravity will affect if it's up on its end. They just want to be level. Just want to try to keep my fingers as clean as possible so as not to contaminate areas that are not supposed to be lubricated. All right, so what I was showing you a moment ago is this gear right here. So the motor shaft right here is going to be spinning 60 hertz. I'm thinking this is going to be spinning at about 1800 RPM. So what I've done is I've just lubricated a couple of the critical parts, all right? This gear, for example, up here, which drives the mechanism, I've lubricated the shaft. Now I'm going to end up lubricating the whole mechanism. Any metal that comes in contact with metal that's in motion is going to have some grease on it. In the case of a shaft that's actually spinning, in the case of this gear here, I'm going to be putting some lightweight oil on that. So I'm going to reassemble this just to see how it will behave. And the first thing I need to do is to elevate this so that it's not resting on all of this stuff underneath. Toothpick material, okay? This someday will be just many, 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 many toothpicks. But right now, it's a turntable support. We're going to live dangerously. What I'm going to introduce you to is, this is what's known as a suicide cord, for obvious reasons. And the connector is right here. The mate for this is actually going to be in the phonograph cabinet. Interestingly enough, it actually provides power to the amplifier circuit board. Well, this is a unique kind of motor. Typically, this is just motor, you put 110 volts to it and it spins at speed and it's happy. In their infinite wisdom to simplify the electronics part of the phonograph itself, the phonograph needs low voltage, probably 12, 15 volts or something like that. I don't know, we can check on that later. But it also needs a transformer, a step-down transformer to take from 120 volts down to whatever voltage the circuit board needs. Power goes into this connector to the motor through the switch, and then low voltage AC comes out of the motor to 2 more pins on this connector. So the job here is to get power to this such that we can power the motor. Not really worried about the low voltage stuff just yet. I just want to get this motor to spin at the correct speed with the deadly 120 volts AC. Okay, pin 1, black to the motor. Pin 3, which is this red wire, to the switch, to the brown wire to power the motor. So I want to get on pins 1 and 3. I'm going to then lay this down. Fear not, okay? I have taken a course in dialing 911. There's a correspondence course, how to dial 911. I got a B. Yeah, I couldn't find the 11 button. This is the top washer for the ball bearing that's in the bottom of this. So we're just going to put that in there like that. The platter is simply going to set down on there and the ball bearings are going to spin on that part. Let's get the idler on here. We're going to clean that spindle and put some fresh oil on there. It doesn't take much, but look at that. This was probably in somebody's man cave or their family room or something like that where they played records. It's not going to be just a matter of cleaning up the old grease, but it's also going to be a matter of cleaning up any residual contamination that may have occurred over time. And that's what we're going to call it. I'm simply just going to put the littlest little bead of oil on there, just next to nothing. I'm going to reinstall the shims that go on that spindle. And I had marked those, the one that goes on top, the one that goes on the bottom, just like that. And then put the idler on there, then the top shim, and then the Jesus clip. I also want to point out that this idler had been in the rejuvenator for 72 hours. So this was basically soaking for 3 days. It is squishy. That's a good thing. You try to convince her of that. Put the top shim on, and then we'll put the Jesus clip on there, and we'll just hope that it doesn't live up to its name. what I tend to do is just get this thing started. All right, give it a little bit more voltage. Lo and behold, okay, so the motor is energizable. So we will just go up to 115 volts and we'll leave it like that. But this is how the speed changes. That would be 16 RPM. That's 33, 45, 78. Because I don't know the condition or the position of the reject mechanism, I don't want that spinning when I put the platter on. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that off for a second. I'm gonna just try to drop this on here without spreading any of that grease around. So I'm letting the platter down very slowly. I want to tuck that idler in there. I don't want the edge of the platter to land on that. So I'm just gonna tuck that underneath there and voila. Now I'm spinning that manually. Now it's slowing itself down because it's engaged with the idler. So I'm going to apply power. Not everything is lubricated, but a couple of the critical moving parts in there have been lubricated. I put some oil on the gear shaft. I also put some grease on the cog, the gear on the turntable platter, and the gear that is also part of that mechanism. And then there's a couple of other little parts underneath there which I can show you later. That'll depend on how it's edited, to allow some pieces of metal to slide past each other. And that for me is going to be the initial tell. So with no records on here and the record hold down arm collapsed, this should indicate to the mechanism that there are no records to play. And if I just go ahead and start this mechanism, it should shut off. So reject, okay. This doesn't seem to be binding too badly. Okay, so it's satisfied and wait, okay. That sound, just like going home. That's the sound of the mechanism saying, no more records to play, I'm gonna go ahead and shut off. So now the idler has actually disengaged from the platter. So you'll see that this thing just sort of spins freely on its own. This little gizmo right here, when you put the records on there, you have to select whether it's a 12-inch or whether it's 10-inch or whether it's a 7-inch. This being a 12-inch record, I'm going to set that to 12 inches. And that way, the tone arm knows where to drop to start record play. I'm getting kind of excited because this so far is behaving as expected. So we'll put 2 records on here. Turn it on. Running. So it should drop the first record without dropping the second. Beautiful thing. Very nice. The couple of moving parts in here that I have lubricated just in order to test what this is capable of are all working. So at this point, we just shut everything down and go back to cleaning out all that old lube and oil and grease and then refreshing all of that. One of the great things about cleaning out all the old oil is that you know where the oil is supposed to be. Same for the grease. If you can see where there's grease that you're going to be cleaning out because it's probably just turned to glue by now anyway, then those are the places that you're going to want to put grease back in, because at least somebody back in the manufacturing days figured out that, okay, yeah, grease needs to be in this spot. So we can use that as a guide to replace the grease. Now, I do want to point out that just because you see dust built up on things does not necessarily mean that it's supposed to have lubricant. This is not an indication that it's supposed to be oiled or greased or any of that, but it means that there's been an oily film that has just built up over time. I'm going to clean a lot of this excess crapola because I don't need it interfering with anything that's supposed to be moving, but we won't talk about my ex-wife. There's a lot of busy stuff going on right here. Just want to be mindful of that. Now I've got it in mid mode. It's actually in the middle of its reject mechanism, but so this pin right here is going to be moving along with this gear, but it rides inside of this groove, which is cut into another piece of metal, which moves and slides up and down in there. So I would call that sort of a cam. Well, it's metal on metal, it's dry, and needs to be greased. Wheel bearing grease. What I want to do is invent an applicator, just like that right there. Now, it's not necessary to just load this up with a bunch of grease, just enough to sort of do the job, and then just run it through its paces a little bit. Now, because this is standing up on end, it's not going to shut off, and the reject mechanism is just going to keep activating because gravity is telling that tab or stem that's actually engaging with the turntable gear. It's just going to keep engaging, but it's also allowing me to get that grease kind of spread around there. I want to get this right to that midpoint again, okay? Because a lot of that grease now has been spread around. I just want to put a little bit more on there now that it's spread it around, which is actually a good sign. Okay, I see one little glob on there which has kind of been pushed out of the way. So I want to sort of reposition that so that it'll get spread around just a little bit more. As I'm doing this, I'm noticing that as the mechanism sort of comes to a halt at the end of its run, there's an arm here that does move, okay? And you can see that right here because that is being held in place by this spring. That spring is really, I mean, that's a really tight spring. But the idea is that that spring brings the whole mechanism back to a starting point for the next trigger, if you will. What's happening here is that right toward the end of the run is when a pin comes around on that reject mechanism gear. What it's doing is it's pushing that arm out of the way. There it is right there. There's that pin. Okay, and then this is going to fall away. And it's going to do that with the help of that spring. It's just really tight, but let's face it, they put that spring in there when they made this thing. So that must be the spring they want. I'd love to get some oil right in here, okay? I put some oil through this little hole right here. So I'm just going to use some smaller pieces of paper towel and just lay this in here to catch any oil that may run off. So I'm going to go ahead and drop just a bead of oil on that. Now I can't get in behind that arm, not with the stem of my oil can. I'm just going to take a screwdriver. I'm going to put a bead of oil on the tip of my screwdriver. I'm going to just finagle, it's a technical term, in behind here and just let that sort of run down into the groove. Of course, that arm only flops back and forth a couple of inches every time the mechanism runs. Okay, I want to see how much tension. That's much better. That is much better. I could feel it in the platter. Part of this gear, which is not easy to see, is this area that's sort of been notched out of the gear, and it actually kind of comes down and then it ends. As that ramps around, that's not part of the ending of the reject mode. It is the beginning. See how that comes down off of the gear and goes back up again? It's basically going to be pushing down on a part of the mechanism, which is important. And because I don't know exactly where it's going to be touching something, I mean, if it's a track, okay, like this, but whatever it's touching may be offset to the left or the right or dead center, who knows. Okay, so it's pushed that grease all off to one side. So that's a tell. So I'm going to then just take and put a little bit back. Some of these parts that I had lubricated with some grease that have been running all this time, I'm just going to go ahead and touch those one more time. I really see that as enough for that part of the reject mechanism, but remember I said there's a lot of business going on up here on the very top. There's some pieces that are sliding past each other, and there's some things that are pivoting. All right, so I want to make sure that those are lubricated, but this is already feeling a whole lot better. I want to point out this record hold down arm, okay? And the mechanism here, of course, once it's fully up, you know, this will swivel out of the way. You can load your records onto that. Once you get it in position and it comes down here, it makes contact with this little piece of metal, and the reject mechanism is going to sense whether that's in this position or this position. And if it's all the way down, then that's going to tell the mechanism that there's no more records to play. But this is really kind of funkified. It's a technical term. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that with grease, but here's the rub, if you will, is I want to make sure that however much grease I put on there never comes out of this stem right here. I just want to put a little piece of grease on there and sort of just work this through the motions. Don't have any grease coming out this hole up here, so that's a good thing. So I'm just going to put one more dollop of grease for good measure. Okay. And while we're back here, I'll show you how this mechanism knows what size records being put on there. I believe up here is 7-inch, this is 10-inch, and that's 12-inch. Well, what's going on back here on camera 3 is this arm here is moving based on the position of the records. That's the 12-inch position, 10-inch position, 7-inch position. And when the reject mechanism begins to activate, this arm is going to move up against that part that moved into position for the size. That is going to create a stop for how far the tone arm moves over to start the record. Now, the next thing is really just to see how the lubrication that I've done is helping. Also to make sure that I haven't boogered anything in the process. So I'm just going to hook the suicide cord back up, run this through its paces, see what's going on. It's set for 12-inch records right now. So if I just hold this up, pretend that there's a record on there, and start this thing up, I'm going to go ahead and just let this shut off before I change the actual record size. That's actually a lot quieter than it used to be. I don't know if you can tell that on the microphone or not, but okay, tone arm is loose, 7-inch record, turn it on, and all right. Now I want to just go ahead and get the platter off. Now I'd put the Jesus clip back on here. So this is the speed ramp, if you will. This mechanism here is ugly. So I want to clean all that crap off of there and then put all new grease in place. There's a scoring mark on this ramp. So that is where we want to make sure we get some grease. I mean, come on. Yeesh. Also want to get grease down here on motor platform, because that piece of metal is basically riding back and forth on that as well. And it looks like it hasn't really been lubricated in a while. Just get this speed control at the end of its run. I mean, look at this scoring mark. This is just like glue. I mean, it is nasty. This adjustment right here that you see right there, that is a height, sort of a tweaking adjustment. So make sure that the idler is engaged in the proper RPM position. These rubber grommets here, those are basically just vibration dampeners, you know, because the motor does have a certain amount of vibration to it. So you want to make sure that that's not getting transmitted into the frame or the body of this record changer, and then it gets sort of translated into the cartridge, and it, you know, has some sort of a, maybe like a low hum or just a rumbling and that sort of thing. Now this by no means is high tech. It's meant to play records. It's not anything that's going to be, you know, any measure of high techness. Just, it's not going to be there. But turning this on, off, it's going to pivot on this part. But the idea is to back that idler away from the inner surface of that turntable so it doesn't develop a flat spot or a divot, because the idler is engaged in the motor. Right now you can see there's a gap there. So there's a gap there so that the idler is not engaged to the motor shaft, which over time, if it just sits there and doesn't get played very often at all, it's going to develop a divot, and that's going to have a knocking sound. Doesn't really have a lot of travel, but it's not a deal breaker. It gets done. Metal on metal, grease. See? I dropped oil where it didn't need to be, but it's not hurting nothing. Okay, and I just want to get that in there without touching the idler. It's like that old game of Operation. It's like, remove funny bone. All right, now that extra grease I got out there, I want to get that out of the way. Did I say grease? I meant oil. And I kind of want to clean that with just a little bit of alcohol, because that oily film will collect dust if you're not careful. Now we'll exercise it through the speeds. Yeah, I know there's no grease on there yet, but I want to just get that oil exercised on there. It's already behaving much better. I'm going to go ahead and just put one little bit of grease right there on the bottom and exercise this and see where it spreads it out to. All right. That scoring mark, that's my target. Yep, it just keeps wiping that off of there, but that's what it's supposed to do. Very nice. Okay. Now, what I mentioned before, as far as this movable ramp here for the speed, okay, it's rubbing on the motor frame, okay? So I'm gonna just do what I can to sort of raise that up, to put some grease on the motor frame itself, so that way this metal sliding on metal will have some lubricant. It's just gonna make for more work. Oh, that's a perfect smear. Yeah. This Jesus clip right here, there's a spring right underneath here, and so that spring is holding this piece of metal down onto the motor frame, but it's still sliding metal on metal. I want to loosen that up just to raise this piece right here. I want to raise that up off the motor frame, get some grease underneath there, and then just put it back on there. But the thing to be mindful of is the Jesus clip. And now the spring that's underneath that, because you've got to hang on to the Jesus clip and then not let the spring take off on you either. I don't like using needle nose or long nose pliers, because if you don't have a really good grip on it, you're going to lose that Jesus clip. And I just activated the mechanism for the motor. Got it. There it is. Now I can tell you from personal experience, it's going to be a challenge to get that back on there. That pin fell out. What did I tell you? Let's get that turned off. And the pin that fell out is right here. Now, like I said, it's going to be kind of a challenge to get that spring and Jesus clip back on there, because the spring's going to want to push the Jesus clip off and the pin's going to want to fall. So I've got to hold the pin with one hand and try to collapse the spring to get the Jesus clip on with the other hand. I'm holding the spring down. When I get this Jesus clip on there, oh, come on, hold that spring down. Yeah, don't get in Jesus' way. It's close. Not quite all the way yet, but I don't think it's going to pop off on its own. The spring is now holding this piece of metal down there, which is that ramp for the speed. When the turntable platter is actually in place, it's going to be pushing back on this. I'm going to clean up a little bit, because I got a lot of that all over my hands. Oof. Yeah, I'm using reagent alcohol. Fear not, I am heavily invested in Gold Bond hand cream. That was in the budget. Basically, erasing all evidence that I was ever in here. and the inside lip of this platter. Okay, bearings are in place. There's still a little bit of grease on there. And one last look. Yeah, everything looks to be okie doke. I'm wondering if I go to the off position, will this actually just shut off with the hold down arm in that position? Because I'm sort of telling it to go off. Yes. Wow. Turn it on. We'll just run it through its paces. Actually, I think we'll just do that. So we'll just pretend we're playing a record. Yeah. No more record. Cool. To 45. Oh. No, I set it to 12. I set it to 7-inch record. Why did it do that? Okay. It's not happy about something. Something has changed. I wonder if... Okay, well, we need to get it to shut off now. You remember that thing that I showed you a little bit ago here on the back? This knob right here is moving out of the way. That's 12-inch, but that's 7-inch. 7-inch is supposed to be down there. That's 10, that's 12, 10, 7. It's not moving back. The question then becomes, well, did it get bent along the way? I mean, there's a spring that's supposed to return that. Let me put a little drop of oil on that. It's kind of crude. It is metal on metal, so to speak. It's really supposed to be floating there, and it's not. Now it's working. I don't know why it needed loosening when it was working before. Because it's metal on metal up in here, I'm going to call that a wiper. It's a jam because when this arm is in certain positions, there are little lips that stop the tone arm at the appropriate position for the lead-in groove, which whatever size record you happen to be playing. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of grease just to that track that this wiper travels in. Yeah, that's already better. I'm going to have to turn this around because if I try to do it the other way, it's going to play the records backwards. I'm going to set this for 12, put a 12-inch record on there. I hope you guys aren't tired or super tramp yet. Well, that's 78 speed. I'll try 33. 7-inch. Bada boom, bada bing. Putting the stylus back in and that little clamp, little bracket that goes on there. All right, so the first thing to go in here is the stylus, and it just sort of just snaps in place. Use a little thumbnail action. And there you go. All right, so that's the LP side, and that's the 78 side. 1 mil conical, 3 mil conical. It's what we used to call micro groove and coarse groove. Change of plan. This clip, this bracket, if you will, okay, is really a pain in the butt to get onto the cartridge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this all set up, get it back into the cabinet, test it all out, listen to it. When everything works, the clip goes on. So I'll clear out some space, because as we saw earlier, this thing takes up the whole bench. Transit clips, in order to get this reinstalled, transit clip right here, it's got to be in the vertical position. Same goes for this one up here. Power cord, plug back in. May have to actually set this in here a little bit in order to shorten the distance. And the audio, it's actually got L and R marked on here, so left and right. And the chassis itself has got some markings on there. All right, that's seated. All right, check the transit clip one last time. Yep, all the cables are cleared. That one fits in. And I want to find a convenient spot to grab this, she said. Just enough to get my hand in there. Okay, we'll set that transit clip. All right, success. God, you'd think it was German with all those tight tolerances. I heard a pop, so maybe the amplifier is working. I hear a little bit of noise. That's a good thing. To play something as a test record without YouTube police getting all up in my soup. Okay, well, that seems to be fine. Amplifier is got some scratchiness in some of these controls here, so we're going to just kind of spray those out a little bit. Well, there's a good chance the pots are dirty. I mean, they tend to set up over time and they get dusty. They might even deteriorate a little bit. So we're gonna douche these just a little bit with some contact cleaner, exercise them. Probably best to just go ahead and put the knob back on there. It'll make it easier to spin these things. Don't really have to squirt a lot in here. Okay, and just be real careful, because just because you're not pointing it at yourself doesn't mean it's not going to come right out back at you, you know? Just like that. I know it got in there when it comes squirting out the other side. And then we'll fire it back up again and see how it behaves. All right, so here's what we know. The stylus had been knocked out of at the cantilever. The cantilever was actually not setting in the cushion for the pickups on the ceramic cartridge cradle, if you will. All right, so it just was not sounding all that good to me. It's sounding a whole lot better now. I'm gonna go ahead and just sort of needle drop. Track 2. Well, I am very satisfied that this is working. As far as, you know, musical content, it doesn't get any worse than that. I think this puppy is about done. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to hit that like button and, you know, drop us a line if necessary, you know, ring the bell and do all of that YouTube stuff. We're glad to hear from you. Thanks for watching.